Привет, Katila, ya, ni хорошо. Because today we have, well, secular talk. So I want to say that before I even start all this, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, or as I like to say, the Papa John's pizza and the raspberry ice cream of it, because that's just my most favorite food, that I really respect Kyle. And this is coming from someone who is right wing. I think he truly cares about the issues that he is pushing, and he really actually, I think he wants a better society. I don't think he's a grifter. I think he's principled, and he just has ideas that he thinks will make the country or society better, and I do respect him. That being said, he is a human being, as far as I know, and like everyone else, every other human, he makes mistakes sometimes and is wrong, and well, he's pretty wrong on this issue, and in this video, I'm going to explain why. So, the video in question that we're going to respond to is called America's Dad Bernard Sanders Gets an Issue Wrong. First things first, and this might be just the most scandalous thing of this whole video, is the title. Pretty cringe, my dude. Pretty cringe. Kyle typically makes fun of Trump sycophants by saying things to the effect of like, oh, they just want to follow Daddy Trump. And now, and it's not just in this video, but in almost every video about Bernie that he makes, he keeps referring to Sanders as his dad. Which, I don't know, but it's pretty cringe. And to be quite honest, it's almost like a cult. And I don't mean that to try to disparage him or anything. I just think he wants Sanders to win so badly that he's progressing towards lunacy. At least in my opinion. Anyway, so what does Kyle finally break from Sanders from? He's a big fan of Sanders. What did Sanders dare say and prepare for it? Prepare for this. What was it that was so bad that it was too much even for Kyle? What had happened? Sanders does not support lifting the criminal penalties for heroin traffickers. Yep, that's the straw that broke Kyle's back. So here is Sanders explaining his position in Kyle's video.
But I agree with those folks who are moving in the direction of decriminalizing at least marijuana right now.
What about hard drugs, though? I mean, that's the Portugal model.
I'm not there yet.
Why not?
Because heroin is a killer. You want to push heroin? Sorry, I'm not too tolerant to that.
Gosh, I don't know, man. I was with Bernie until he suggested that those who push heroin should be put in prison. That's just too conservative, man.
But it worked in Portugal.
God, that annoyed me. So, except in Portugal, they did not fully decriminalize drugs. Portugal actually follows what Bernie wants, which is treating the addicts of drugs as victims and giving them the tools to get off their addiction. It is still a criminal offense to produce and distribute drugs. Your ass is back to the fucking, showers, if you do that. So, and even for possessors of hard drugs, you still go to court. The only difference being is that if you're caught with a small amount, you're not automatically thrown in prison, but you are sentenced to drug courts where there's like a panel of people, of 3, I believe, and they basically sentence you to either a drug rehab program, that you could be fined, you could be banned from practicing like being a doctor or a lawyer, they could ban you from traveling abroad. So Kyle's saying that the Portuguese government is just not give a shit on if people produce, sell, and use hard drugs. They just completely don't give a shit. It's just, they don't care at all. That's just lunacy. So we will get to the results of the Portuguese model later, but the characteristic of it that it's just a full hard drug decriminalization where the government just does not give a shit and will not hassle you for it if you have drugs is autistic.
There's an argument from a principled perspective about, hey, if you're not hurting anybody else, why shouldn't you be allowed to do it? So even if it's bad for you, you have the choice to do what's bad for you. There's a basic freedom argument there and a liberty argument there.
Oh, yeah! Yes! Oh, yes. Why won't someone think about my right to snort cocaine? How dare the government try to have a society not infected with the evils of drug abuse? How dare they? So let me address the so-called principled argument for drug use. So I'm going to first of all make a counter-proposal to Kyle's claim. Yes, the government does have a vested interest in restricting what you can and cannot do with your body to a certain extent, to certain limits. The government controls how fast you can drive on the roadways, and that you have to wear a seatbelt, and that the car must have certain safety features and efficiency standards. The government does not allow you to own fully automatic machine guns. The government requires doctors and lawyers to follow rules and guidelines to get their trade and when they practice it. The government regulates the flow of labor and goods between its borders. The government does not allow you to engage in sex with your sister, or a 16-year-old, or whatever, So all these things are so-called victimless crimes, and the reason why the government regulates things that don't have a victim is because there's a broader societal interest at stake. So your right to become a heroin junkie and addict negatively impacts the social order and the society we live in, and thus the government has a vested interest in promoting good behaviors and dissuading bad behavior. The question is, though, what is the best way we can do it? What Kyle is saying is that a fentanyl trafficker, is just engaging in a regular business enterprise, and that the government does not have a right in cracking down on fentanyl production and distribution, which is absurd. We have an opioid crisis today because the government was hands-off. And because it was hands-off, the businesses push these deadly drugs on their patients to get profit at the expense of hundreds of thousands of lives, and much more affected with broken families, healthcare costs, more violent crime, etc., etc. People who say, oh, why does it matter if the people around you do heroin, has never been around people who have done heroin. Plus, when you get addicted to drugs, the argument that you are consenting to destroying yourself and the world around you is mute, because you are addicted, and by definition, that means you are a slave to that drug. You're not consenting to it. Plus, Kyle wants all healthcare to be paid for by society, which just adds another justification that society has a vested interest in making sure that we don't have a bunch of drunks or addicts around, because we are all paying for their bill. So, yeah, the government can control, regulate, and yes, even ban so-called victimless activities, because there is a broader societal interest at stake that overrides your individual freedom to do whatever the hell you want. The question being is, what is the best tool used for this? And where is the line where the government overreaches in restricting what you can and cannot do? And, when is it legitimate? So me and Bernie, and any other sane person, believe that you wanting to shoot up heroin is overwritten by the broader goal of trying to stomp out hard drug addiction. Now, Kyle tries to say that somehow having heroin and cocaine and meth being sold at CVS won't increase drug use. It will actually decrease it. But sometimes the mask slips and he admits that even if drug use were to go up, it would not matter to him because of freedom. So if American society becomes the land of junkies, addicts, and leading to more homelessness and crime and the breakdown in the social order, breakdown of families, increased healthcare costs, more deaths, and the destructions of one's own body and life. As Bernie said, heroin is a killer. And because Kyle has been living under a rock apparently and has not learned from the opioid crisis, he'd be willing to see society degenerate into a cesspool of addiction and destruction, all because of freedom. So yeah, fuck drugs, fuck them all, and I will smile at the day when we finally rid these cancers from society for good. Okay, next.
But putting that one aside, it's just worked in Portugal. They have the best outcomes on this stuff. They actually have fewer people who are addicted, and they decriminalize drugs.
So, no, Portugal is not the best in the world in terms of outcomes. It's about in line with the European average. And while, yes, they have less overdoses than, say, we do, let me remind you that in the United States, for years, we had a hands-off approach where the government did not give a damn about the selling of addictive opioids, and thus now we are in the middle of an opioid crisis. And Portugal cracks down on those who sell hard drugs pretty heavily. Knowing these two facts, I'll make you come to your own decision on that.
So, and somebody made an interesting point. They told me, that the views are going to be retrograde when somebody says, I'm not there yet. So, in other words, that's like them saying, like, I know where I'm supposed to be, but I'm not there yet. So it's not like a hard disagree. It's like, that's probably the right answer, but I can't bring myself to that position yet for whatever reason.
Yes. How retrograde of us and authoritarian of us to say that, we don't want rampant meth use in our society. How terrible we are. You see, this, I think, shows it clearly. Just because it's progress does not mean it's good. The progressives will keep progressing till and they will destroy everything that is traditional in the name of progress. And the so-called conservatives will keep acting like like that socially awkward kid at a party. Well, I don't know. We shouldn't shame and discourage drug use, because that'd be kind of mean. But gosh golly, I don't think legalizing cocaine is the answer. Utter lunacy. Perhaps, if we had stable families, a strong sense of national identity, fulfilling and loving communities with the right institutions in place, maybe we wouldn't have or need people injecting heroin in their veins to actually feel something in this society.
So, and just so you know, we're not even talking about legalizing all drugs in the context of this clip. We're talking about he wants to legalize recreational marijuana, but he stopped short of saying decriminalize all drugs. To which I respond, we're not even talking about legalization. You can't even agree to decriminalization?
Nope.
But very simply put, this is not a criminal issue.
Yes, it is, you gargantuan orangutan.
If you admit that, hey, we're talking about addiction here and a mental health issue, then how can you then also say at the same time, oh, keep it a criminal issue?
All right, I'll actually address these points. Okay, so, as I mentioned, the government does have a right to punish behaviors that are bad and promote good behaviors. And the goal of a drug-free society, or reducing drug use, is a goal that the government must embark upon based on the Everest level amount of evidence showing the destructive effects that drugs cause, not just to society, to the family, or to the community, but to the individual themselves. The question is, what is the best way we do this? Now, believe it or not, I kind of am sympathetic to the idea like Portugal, where addicts who are in need of help, because, this is a disease, it is killing us, and that the idea that throwing them in jail, I actually don't think throwing them in jail, will solve this. We need an alternative to incarceration. And I think there is merit to that argument. But you can believe that and also, for some I can't speak, say that the government should punish harshly those who push hard drugs and produce them, because of the massive damage that they cause. The goal of the government, or one of them, is stomping out drug use. Addicts are victims, and we should let them get off these substances with investments in drug courts, mental health rehab, and those who push them, like traffickers and producers, who are injecting this poison in our society and destroying it, and thus to the mountain level of evidence of the effect that their so-called business does, they need to be treated like the criminals that they are. Also, let's point and laugh at retardville at the idea of legalizing drugs. Kyle, rants about profits and how they get in the way of running a functioning society. Like, he uses this in his healthcare, for example, But, does Kyle not see how, let's say, a company that is pushing heroin or cocaine, how will they get more money? By getting people more addicted to them. And that is a recipe for disaster. But it does not matter to Kyle, because society will just be so hunky-dory with people just snorting cocaine every night like it's a drink of beer. And, as society degenerates around us, it does not matter because of, freedom, bro.
No, that's insane. You should decriminalize all drugs, at least decriminalize all drugs. At the very least. And just so Bernie knows, prohibition, when it comes to substances, flat out has not worked. So what happens when you ban something is you push it underground to the black market, and then there's more crime associated with the product as a result of it being on the black market. Why?
Except, in Singapore, where they literally cane your ass and give mandatory death sentences for drug traffickers, and they have swift penal codes for having drugs, and they have one of the most lowest drug usage rates in the world, with only about 0.005% using weed, 0.005% using opioids, and 0.003% using ecstasy, which is lower than Portugal, by the way.
Because gangsters and criminals have a monopoly, and they make all the money, and they're the ones who are involved in selling the product. So if there's some sort of dispute on the streets, you solve it with guns. You solve it with guns and violence. If this stuff is decriminalized, if this stuff is legalized, you solve it going to court wearing suits and ties.
Yeah, nice rhetoric there. Okay, so this is a big brain, galaxy brain idea that drug types like to push for their case. Oh, you can't restrict it because banning it actually does not get rid of it entirely, and it is still there, so it's useless to do anything about drug abuse, and so we should just have heroin be sold at a Walmart pharmacy. So here's the thing. When there is a high demand for a product, and you ban it, yes, it will go to a so-called black market. So how do you exactly solve that? You simply try to lower the demand. And how do you lower the demand without fully legalizing drugs? You have a combined effort from the education system, to the healthcare system, to the police, to the community support, all these things. You're trying to get those who are addicted off the drugs, and you have to make people see it as bad as, say, snorting leaded gasoline, which is banned. Now, I would like to see Kyle argue for leaded gasoline to be legal, since the leaded gasoline is only on the black market, but it's fully banned, But anyway, so it says, so you lower the demand for it by having a wide society effort to discourage it. You have to have fair and evidence-backed policies in place for those who are addicted, like drug courts and such, and swift, harsh penalties for those who peddle drugs. You lower the demand, the easier it will be to ban it or put heavy restrictions on it. Also, as a society, we can restrict someone running a business. If your business requires you to use child slave labor or pay your workers, ass wages, or you have to spew trash into the local river, then your business does not have a right to exist, as Kyle has parroted many times. But if you want to start a business in peddling drugs of death which destroy people and kill them and rip apart families and communities and degenerate our society into filth and degeneracy, then somehow they totally have a right to operate. It's just a normal business. Again I say, your right to snort cocaine is overwritten by a broader societal interest in preventing drug use.
So we have the example of alcohol. We know what happened with alcohol. When there was alcohol prohibition, we had a giant spike in organized crime, a giant spike in violent crime, because you gave a monopoly to criminal organizations and gangsters. And so they got incredibly powerful. The mafia was massively powerful during the Prohibition era because they made all the money from selling the alcohol.
Oh, fuck, not this ass again. So, as I mentioned, as alcohol was a product that was high in demand and that was banned, just fully outright, yes, that would lead to a black market, which can be exploited by gangs. However, Prohibition did lead to lower alcohol-related consumption and health effects. Also, if you have meth traffickers be illegal, then those who deal in meth are just going to be the criminals. Like, no shit, that's why it's illegal, you orangutan. Just as having a ban on stealing cars creates a monopoly where only car thieves can steal cars. Also, crime has been dropping since the 90s, and in America we passed stricter criminal penalties during that time. Which is odd, our war on drugs is still ongoing, but the crime is going down, which seems to counteract Kyle's claim. It's also one thing to say, to ban a product that 80% of people use, and ban a product, let's say, only 5 or 10% of people use. We wage these wars against destructive behavior for the greater good of society, and ultimately for yourself. Ask yourself, are you really free trying to catch a bigger high and you're enslaved to this chemical substance? Is that really freedom? I'd argue true freedom is the knowledge that you're not in bondage and on a path of self-destruction, and that you have control of your destiny and yourself, and you can uphold yourself to something other than self-centered hedonism and to a higher duty. That is truly liberating.
And also, there's a regulation issue, which is when the alcohol was made underground, they used to cut it with incredibly dangerous substances, and then every now and then people would just die from drinking a bad batch of alcohol because they were making it in bathtubs with terrible stuff. So we know prohibition doesn't work, so you should obviously be against prohibition and at the very least be in favor of decriminalizing these substances.
We did not eliminate, all car accidents or cancer deaths, so we should just abolish speeding laws and research into curing cancer. We lost, guys. Pack it up. There's no cure. Let's just unleash the bowels of addiction onto the populace, which, won't have any effect whatsoever on society and those who have to suffer because of it.
If you admit that, hey, it's an addiction issue, it's a mental health issue, then you cannot say also, well, keep it criminalized.
Except we can, you dumbass. There is a difference between realizing addicts need help outside the criminal justice system and allowing fentanyl traffickers to not be punished with jail time.
Now, there's later on in the clip, you didn't see it there, he goes on to talk about, how I think he's sympathetic to that point when it comes to the user, but not the seller. Like he does it, the seller he has no, sympathy for or whatever. Well, listen, then how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go in this conversation? Because honestly, oftentimes it comes back to people growing up in very impoverished communities, having really zero real options, shitty schools that are massively underfunded, no job opportunities, and that path is the only path available to try to maybe get out of that situation, and people end up taking it.
I cry for those who peddle fentanyl and meth and cocaine and crack and, unleash it on the streets. I cry for them. I really am sympathetic to them. A lot of these communities that are impoverished in the first place, a lot of these communities that are here, that are impoverished, they're impoverished in the first place because of rampant drug abuse, that plagues their city. And the drugs themselves are what keep people in a drugged up stupor, and prevents them from going forward in life. Also, what he's saying is, people just have no choice anymore than to peddle crack into their neighborhoods. Bullshit. Schools might be not as good, jobs might not be so great, but people don't just engage, I didn't get the best education, so I'm going to peddle in the drug industry. I'm going to engage in a criminal enterprise that destroys communities and families. Kyle rants and raves about the evils of people owning firearms and thinks we should ban most of them except pistols. But yet when people peddle drugs, we should somehow be sympathetic to that. How about if these places are as bad as Kyle says they are, let's invest in improving education, having an industrial strategy to rebuild our jobs. The solution isn't, let's have LSD, crack, and heroin be sold freely on the streets. That will certainly solve the crime issue and the poor quality of the community for sure.
So we have to change, the culture around it, the economic circumstances around it, the educational opportunities. But also, yes, I would argue you have to decriminalize.
I agree, but, you keep saying that word, and I don't think you know what that means. If you follow the Portugal model, which you hold up as the gold standard, they throw your ass in prison for peddling and creating drugs, and they hassle you through community service, drug courts, mandatory rehab, and restrictions if you're caught with it. It's not like the Portuguese government is like, lol, traffic heroin here, it'll be fine, herp-a-dur-da-dur.
At the very least, you have to decriminalize. So I disagree with Bernie on this. By the way, this is the second time I've heard him say this recently on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think Joe Rogan also asked him about potentially decriminalizing all drugs or going further than marijuana, and he stopped short again, and he said the same thing he said here to Crystal Ball. But yeah, I just flat out disagree with it. We have the model of Portugal,
which lines up, with pretty much what Bernie wants, you fucking retard.
Which has been proven to work, and it's fantastically well.
Well, yes, but you know who has even lower drug abuse rates? Singapore, which canes you and executes drug traffickers.
And we have the opposite example of what happens with prohibition, and we know it's a disaster. We know what happens now with the drug war, because we're going through it right now. With all the problems associated with the drug war and how there were cartels and then they splintered and now they're mega cartels and there's so much violence and hundreds of thousands of deaths associated with the prohibition of it. So you can't do prohibition at the...
Or, you know, the millions that have died directly from these substances as well. You know, that's another thing you should consider. You know, and the countless human societal costs that we see with widespread drug abuse. You know, perhaps, you know, you deal in criminal activity, you know, you get violence. Shocker, I know. But I'm sure that, you know, when everyone's shooting up heroin, you know, crime won't go up. You know, there won't be a breakdown in, like, the societal order. You know, that everything will just be fine. You know, that'll be fine. Everything's fine.
At the very least, you have to decriminalize these substances. The real conversation should be about legalizing.
No, you fucking great ape from Kenya. The real conversation is how we balance having order and having individual freedom, and knowing that rampant drug use destroys our society, you know, our families, our communities, and ourselves. You know, what are the best ways we can to reduce demand and give addicts the tools they need to combat this plague and punish those who push it? That is the real conversation, not just like, oh, legalize it all.
Now, I get it. If Bernie wants to say to me, come on, man, there's some substances that just flat out shouldn't be legal. Yeah, if you're talking about crocodile, if you're talking about crystal meth, crocodile, the life expectancy once you start it is like a year and your skin rots off and melts off your body. And crystal meth is, you know, is terrible in a variety of ways, and your teeth fall out of your face and you age at like quadruple the rate. So you don't have to sell me on the idea of many substances being bad.
Wow. You know, what happened to that crusade against banning anything? You know, why ban crocodile or crystal meth? You know, these are, as you pointed out, drugs that basically kill you. I mean, you'd be better off, you know, you would have better luck swimming in the core of a nuclear reactor, but you want to ban them. What if people get tired of injecting themselves with, you know, heroin and they want a bigger high? I mean, are you going to restrict their freedom to inject something stronger? I mean, you draw the line to ban certain substances. I think most people also draw that line at a lot of hard drugs because of the terrible effects that they cause. And I'm going to pose a question. You know, for those who push crocodile into say, a community of 50,000 people, you know, where the drug kills them within a year and their skin falls off and they become a non-functioning person like a zombie, are you saying that those who profit from that type of human misery and suffering and the destruction of society, they are not criminals? You know, Kyle says yes to crocodile pushers that that should be banned, but not for heroin or fentanyl pushers, which, as we have seen in the opioid crisis, has caused untold levels of suffering and brutality. But somehow those who push this to make money are not criminals, and the government somehow does not have the right to stop it.
But...
fuck. Here we go again.
Should there be legal, taxed, and regulated versions of all different kinds of potential highs?
No.
Whether it's an uppy high and whether it's a downy high, whether it's whatever it might be. Yes, there should be that option available on the marketplace.
Wow. So Kyle's thoughts on how drugs operate is like... It's so infantile that I think it's an insult to preschoolers. Jesus Christ, that was so dumb. You know, Kyle is so delusional to the effects of drugs. I think it's actually no wonder why he thinks legalizing it is actually an alright thing to do. I don't think he has actually spent any time around heroin addicts or people dying from meth. You know, he's safe in his rich suburb of New York, you know, having a romanticized view of the world. You know, I can't even put into words, you know, how unintelligible, you know, the idea that drugs are just, you know, they're just highs and lows. You know, I've actually seen him make this argument before. He's like, you know, he said something like, well, you know, coffee gives you a slight high, as does heroin. You know, if you're going to ban heroin, then why don't you just ban coffee as well? But except there is different highs. There is a world of difference between, say, an energy drink and fucking snorting crack cocaine. You know, one, while we can discuss the effects of drinking energy drinks, is something that can be legal despite whatever effects, because the harm can be justified for individual use and does not threaten society by drinking, a Monster Energy drink, for example. Crack cocaine, on the other hand, has so much bad effects to its usage that the government does have a right to restrict it. It's just highs and lows, man. What a fucking stupid understanding of how drugs work. It's not just a high, you great ape. All societies, balance order and freedom. The question is, what is the line? Energy drinks that have some effects, but are they worthy of a ban? Nah. Some regulation and you're alright. Fentanyl? Yeah, for the sake of the greater societal interest, you don't have the right to use it or profit from selling it. Another thing he mentioned earlier is that, thinks that if we just, Kyle thinks that if we just regulate all the downsides will go away from drugs, which is just a galaxy brain level retard take. Certain drugs are just self-evidently going to get you addicted and destroy you, no matter how regulated they get. Kyle has some sort of magical thought on how drugs work, that, if we just legalize and regulate taking heroin, taking heroin would be just like sipping a cup of coffee, and it's just a slightly bigger high. You guys know the saying, you can polish a turd, but it's still a turd. You can make heroin not infected with any sort of other street effects. It's just pure, clean heroin. But it's still fucking heroin. And it will still destroy your life and those around you, at such a destructive effect that it is justified to crack down on those who push it.
Because I believe in freedom.
You live in a society, Kyle. You don't have the freedom to do everything and anything you want. You always talk about a social contract. Part of that social contract is realizing, okay, for the purposes of having a functioning and moral society and civilization, I can't peddle crack for profit.
And I also believe people are going to weasel their way around anyway, and you want them to have relatively safe options as opposed to the dangerous options which are only available on the black market, and the worst versions which are only available on the black market.
People are still going to use drugs even if we try to discourage us, so let's just give up It's such a low IQ take, I tell ya. Let's just throw our hands up and stop enforcing speeding laws or trying to crack down on illegal immigration or machine gun use. Oh yeah, also Kyle supports banning crystal meth. Why don't you want so-called clean, safe version of crystal meth available through regulation? You really did shoot yourself in the foot saying we can ban certain types of horrible substances. Also Kyle thinks drugs should be banned to be given to minors. Well, aren't minors going to be snorting meth anyway? Why ban it? Let's just throw our hands off and allow children to have access to clean, safe heroin from the prescription store. Since, banning it isn't going to prevent, children from using it, it's just going to lead to a child's black market. So let's, do you see how absurd this can get?
Listen, man, if you can go buy like 3 giant bottles of whiskey and drink yourself to death at 7 a.m. in the morning if you choose, don't tell me it's a crazy idea to have legal, taxed, and regulated versions of all these different substances.
Do you have any idea, the absolute destruction alcohol brings to our society? No, alcohol should be there should be discouraged as well. What about, do you think alcohol should be restricted? Yes. Also, your idea is crazy, Kyle. What you're proposing is people shooting up heroin or snorting cocaine like it's coffee or a drink of Monster Energy. And Kyle is such an orangutan that he thinks it's just like a high, like any of those other things. So there's no distinction whatsoever.
Because that is a matter of freedom. And that is a matter of personal choice. I'm all for safety rules and regulations and things of that nature, but to take this hardcore criminalize it approach is not just anti-freedom. It's also kind of dumb. So I think Bernie in this instance is just kind of a victim of the society and the culture that we've always lived in, where it's been illegal for so long, there's just the default. Everybody thinks, I guess that's how it should be. But no, it really shouldn't be like that, Bernie, and I hope he evolves on this.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Those who want to clamp down on drug traffickers, crack peddlers, and heroin dealers are dumb, and we are victims and should evolve. Kyle, Listen here, buddy. You are a victim of your own autism on this issue. So, no, you don't have an absolute freedom to do whatever you want. The government has legitimate goals in restricting and discouraging activities that threaten the peace and order of this society. The question is, where is the line, and what should be the approach? Kyle says there is no line, and the approach should be to allow society to generate into an addicted, drugged up stupor. But then at the same time, says we should regulate and ban away all the bad from these harmful substances till they are just a high like coffee, and then says la 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 la, saying that we can't fight drug abuse because there will always be drug abuse, apparently suggesting we should just stop fighting crime at all, and then also directly contradicting himself. Also, what if people want a bigger high than what is allowed by regulation? I mean, you're gonna ban them from getting that high? And if you're like, well, yeah, crystal meth is too much, but meth is fine. Then we're back at square one, only with a more broken society, more crime, more homelessness, decreased health, the breakup of the families and the social fabric, and the destruction of the soul and quality of our nation's society. Also, he keeps saying that it worked in Portugal, when another model from Singapore has greater results and uses much more hard set measures than even the United States does. But even in Portugal, it's not like what Kyle says. There is a crackdown on traffickers and producers. Addicts are sent to mandatory drug courts where their fate is put in, community service, mental health, rehab, and that's for just having a small amount. You're still put through the legal system. The government doesn't just give up on fighting drug abuse. That is why they embarked on this measure, because they would decrease drug abuse and would decrease drug use overall, which is the goal. We live in a society, Kyle. Drug abuse is a legitimate evil that governments understand that if gone unchecked can lead to disastrous consequences, as the opioid crisis has shown. Your view on drugs and how they work is infantile at best, and you have some sort of defeatist attitude that we shouldn't even care about rampant drug addiction because there will always be people taking drugs and freedom, man. Drug abuse should be stomped out, dissuaded, and curb stomped, and those who peddle it into our communities thrown in jail or worse. The question is, what is the best way we deal with those who suffer from this disease? What is the best strategy to achieving our goal of a drug-free society? We might not get there 100%, but it is a legitimate and necessary goal, and it is a good that all of us should try to achieve. So that's my video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you like and subscribe if you want to help me out, and you comment what you thought. I also hope if you really, really super duper liked it, that you check out my Patreon. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.